Hey, it's Mr. Hendrickson. This little video is just an intro to chapter 14, which is on the Renaissance. And what I want you to do before you start looking at chapter 14 is to flip back to chapter 13 and to look at this work right here. And just visually analyze it and look at how awkward it is. The figure is very flat, very two-dimensional. It's not in any kind of realistic proportion. And there's really no clear sense of deep space or any space at all in the image. So as you start with chapter 14, which really begins on page 276, and you look at this painting by Giotto, the book says that's really the start of the Renaissance. And you'll probably find some other sources that say this work or that work. But we'll start with this one and just look at the figures first and foremost. They're very three-dimensional. Each one is a specific individual with realistic facial features. There's a foreground, a middle ground, and a background. So there's a sense of space. There's realistic proportion. Some are in profile, some are in three-quarter view. So it's just a much more complex and much more realistic view than what we saw in chapter 13 at the end, which is Byzantine art or art from the Middle Ages. So the focus in this chapter is really all about the artist. The Renaissance is probably the only time period in history where the artists sort of dominate the politicians, the kings, the queens in terms of name recognition. When you hear the term Renaissance, which means rebirth, you might automatically think of Leonardo or Michelangelo. So our focus in the class will be essentially the Italian Renaissance. So that's from the start of the chapter all the way up through artists like Leonardo and Michelangelo. And you'll see a variety of works from each artist. There's an interesting section that I want to make sure that you read on pages 290 and 291, which is about the restoration of not only the Sistine Chapel, but also of Leonardo's Last Supper. So we'll study through all that all the way up to Michelangelo's Last Judgment, which is the large altar wall painting in the Sistine Chapel. So that's roughly half the chapter, and that'll be our main focus in the class. But I do encourage you to read the rest of the chapter, which focuses on artwork from the north. So the Renaissance didn't just happen in Italy, it happened all throughout Europe and had been happening in France, with the building of all the great Gothic cathedrals. But particularly there's some interesting paintings from Flemish painters from modern day Holland, the Netherlands, and also German artists like Albrecht Dürer. So if you find this time period in art very interesting, then I encourage you to read the rest of the chapter. But the main thing to notice is, or to take note of, the artist, what the artist did, what the artist created, but also as you progress through that section of the chapter, things becoming more and more realistic. And then beginning with Leonardo and particularly with Michelangelo, you have realistic figures, but they're also very graceful and very beautiful.